conference which is organized by the University of Florence on the issue, the EU and member states in global affairs, any sign of convergence. This afternoon, we will touch a very sensitive question. We have in the world, in the Mediterranean, in many areas of Europe, great difficulties, conflicts, and what so-called international crisis. The real question, sente? Non si sente. Sì, chiedo. I'll try again. Now it's better? Okay. So we will touch the issue of the difficult relation between the EU and the international crisis. We had a problem with Stefania Panebianco, who is connected with us through Skype because her flight was overbooked last night and she is stuck in Catania. So we will change a little bit the program. We will ask Stefania Panebianco to speak later. And the first person that will introduce this session is Ambassador Alessandro Merola. I am very grateful to Ambassador Merola to be here. We have the opportunity to cooperate together in several areas of training, but I will just recall some of Alessandro Merola, Ambassador Merola experience. Ambassador Merola currently works within the Prime Minister office in Italy, but has been in service since many years at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He had a wide experience in Asia. More recently, he has been ambassador in Belgrade. He has been the Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So he's the right person, I think, to introduce this and Brussels. So at this point, I think the best thing is to give Ambassador Merola the opportunity to give his speech, and then we will have Stefania Panebianco as, in this case, as second choice. Go ahead. Thanks again to be here.
Hello. Hello. Yeah. Well, thank you, Marco. I would like to start saying that history sometimes plays strange jokes. I think that there are two gentlemen, two very classical diplomats that wherever they are now, they must be very surprised from the number of times they are being evoked nowadays. And I refer to two gentlemen that maybe you have heard about, Mr. Mark Sykes and Mr. Georges Picot. Does any one of you have an idea who they were? Doesn't matter, you're professional, you can't say, you can't talk. Mr. Sykes, former colonel, conservative member of parliament at his time, friend of Harold Winston, started to know Harold Winston, imagine. Was a British diplomat, and his counterpart, Mr. Georges Picot, was also a French diplomat. They were two serious professionals. They didn't know, but in fact they opened the Pandora box. They were the two guys that signed in 1916, so still pending the First World War, the end of the Ottoman Empire. They made an agreement that in fact fragmented the Ottoman Empire with the Russian support and in the end also the Italian support. What was the disagreement? Have you ever heard about this? Because he's been referred to many times lately, considering what's going on in the Middle East. Okay, what you have there was the extension, I would say the maximum extension of the Ottoman Empire. We are talking about 1680, when it was the moment of major glory of the empire. Give a look to this. Here from Byzantium, from the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, covered practically all North Africa, the whole Middle East, and a good part of Eastern Europe. What was interesting in the Ottoman Empire is that, in fact, as in every empire, there was a central power, and all these, what would have become countries afterwards, at that time was just a vilayet, that means provinces, in fact, of the empire. And I personally am an admirer of the Ottoman Empire because they had a philosophy like the Roman Empire or the Austrian Empire. All the empires must have that. That is, they were basically suppliers of services. The services that normally are inherent to a state, which is defense, justice, and public order, I would say. I mean, if you study law, you know that the basic function of a state are those, no? Police, foreign policy, defense. So this is, and all the empires, including the Roman Empire at the time, they were provider of services like this. And they absolutely respected, I mean, within certain limits, but basically they did. They respect the religion, the ethnic differences, the tribal situation in certain countries. So they were kind of a supervisor of these melting pots that existed in the different regions of the empire. Unfortunately, all the empires ended, except for the British Empire, which ended in the Second World War, but the First World War was the end of the big empires, the Austrian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And there was the rising of the national states. Basically what happened? One tombstone for the empire, for the Ottoman Empire, was, this is another view of the extension of the Ottoman Empire. Please appreciate the vastity of it, the differences that it covered, from Serbia to Yemen to God knows what. Okay, and now let's come to our friends, Sykes and Picot. What did they do? They made a secret agreement, very secret, that in fact partitioned the main provinces, or the eastern and the Middle East provinces, as you would say, from the Ottoman Empire, in three different spheres of influence. A French one, a British one, and a Russian one. Then Italy came later because they wanted to have something, some leftovers. But that didn't work very much. Same as the Russian side didn't work, because that happened in 1916. So right after that, there was the Russian Revolution. So the Russians, in fact, withdrew from that agreement, or they didn't remain part of the agreement. Now look at what you have there. All right, the lower part, this is Arabia, Saudi Arabia, let's say. The big division was here, covering Iraq, the present Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and a part of the Persian Empire, or that is Iran, that today is Iran. You can understand that creating so-called national states, although still colonial under protectorate, but in fact, each state was not clearly defined before. It became defined after this agreement. And this is the Pandora's box. That's why we are now living some of the problem that didn't exist with the old empire. Just wanted to show you something. Okay, that was Iraq before the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Look at that. What do you see there? Vilayet de Mosul, Vilayet of Baghdad, Vilayet of Basra. What corresponds to that? Kurds, Shiites, yes, Shiites, and Sunni, or Sunni, as you would like them. That is, the three of them lived together with no many problems for hundreds of years. Think at Iraq now. Well, this is the last part. Okay, let's go back to Mexico. Think at Iraq now. After the American intervention in 2003, they are killing each other every day, and there is a perpetual fight or struggle between the Shiites, the Sunni, and the Kurds, which give room to ISIS. So I'm telling you all this because just to appreciate that there must be a kind of order in international politics. There was an order with the Ottoman Empire. Mr. Sykes and Monsieur Picot, they broke that order. And they create the premises for disorder, which is exactly what is happening now. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure that somebody was talking to me. So let's come back to the point of order. After the First World War, we were still in the colonial time. So all this partition that was arranged after the Georges-Picot and Mark Sykes agreement remained under the French dominion, and on the other side on the British Empire and so on. Now comes the Second World War, and even the last empire ends. The British Empire broke up. How was possible to keep order in the region? Well, the only solution, in fact, was what I call the system of bulwarks. A bulwark, can you tell it in Italian, means a baluardo. You can call it also a system of gendarme, the gendarme, as the French would say. That is, all of these countries in North Africa and Middle East, they had normally military people watching, that was the watchdog of the order. What happened inside those countries was not very important. The important thing is that they were faithful to the West. They gave the guarantee that the important energy sources that existed in the region were open to the Western investments. They kept the public order. They almost didn't have, with the exception of Egypt, but that changed also afterwards. They didn't have a foreign policy because the foreign policy was, in fact, dictated by the situation, especially by the patron, the Western patron that they had. And this system worked more or less with with some problems, of course. There were intense of revolts, think at Algeria. There were inner problems. But all the system of the bulwarks, as I call it, worked until the so-called Arab Spring, that in fact are not very spring, I would say. But we'll talk later. But the first shake-up to the system of gendarmes, or bulwarks, was in fact the 2003 Iraqi war, where for the first time, even if Saddam Hussein, which was a big bulwark, of course, but okay, he was a bit rogue, he made this war against Kuwait, but you see that in fact George Bush first didn't shake up the situation too much. Okay, you have been the villain of the situation, dear Saddam Hussein, these things you shouldn't do, you invaded Kuwait, now you are under surveillance, I will give you a sanction, we'll give limitation, but the situation didn't change very much, in fact. And Saddam Hussein was still a bulwark. He ended to being a bulwark in 2003 with the Iraqi war. And that was a strange move. Now, I say strange is an understatement because, let's say it was not a functional move. What was the basic idea? As Lucio Caracciolo says in one of his article on Limes, the idea of George Bush Jr. was that in fact all those dictatorships, some of them, were not functional to the American foreign policy because they were in fact facilitating the rise of terrorism. So the reasoning was quite simple in his point of view. There are other reasons that I will tell you, but anyway. But under this point of view, in a very strategic vision, why should I support a regime or a dictator or a gendarme, or call it whatever you want, that is not able to keep these terrorists at bay? So I can invade him, I can throw him down. That was one of the reasons. The other reason, as usual when you talk about the United States, was follow the money. Because I think that Mr. Cheney with his Halliburton and several other oil companies were rather interested in having a firmer grip on the country. And another reason was, of course, the electoral perspective. After the 9/11, so he has to be renewed, he was renewed, so he needed a war. Sometimes politicians need a war. They don't make election in function of the war, or they make the war in function of election, which is more interesting. But anyway, look at Sarkozy. And so that was the first time that all this delicate balance was shaken. The second time came with the so-called Arab Springs. And the biggest bulwark of all, Mubarak, was put aside. But the internal revolts, but not that much. In fact, the Americans and even the Europeans were very eager to put him out of the power. What a pity that the alternative was not religious parties or people like El Baradei or other these people. The alternative were the Muslim Brotherhood. So the moment the Muslim Brotherhood, with a, let's say, benign neglect from the part of the West, took the power through the elections, maybe somebody look itself in the mirror and say, oh my God, we made a mess. And then immediately came the reaction. And now we have a new bulwark, a new gendarme in Egypt, General Sisi, President Sisi. Very good bulwark, by the way. Just think at this shaking situation in Egypt meant for Israel, for example. That was a problem. Other gendarmes that fell down with the Arab revolts, with the tolerance, if not support, of the West. Ben Ali in Tunisia, 3 days. 3 days after the revolts, Ben Ali fell. My God, it had been there for 20 years, I think, or something like this. The Algerians, Bouteflika, almost fell. And he's sick now. There is a strange situation in Algeria. The lightest of all, Gaddafi. Although the situation there was a bit different in that sense. Now, what do we have after the bulwarks fell? I'm not making, please understand me, I'm not trying to make an ethic or democratic consideration. And I'm talking about, in very rough terms, about the real situation which is going on. What is my point? My point is that, in fact, there was a kind of a strategy before that foresaw all these bulwarks, all these gendarmes in the different countries that in one way or the other kept things quiet. Then the West itself, for political, or not so much political, I guess more, yes, ethic or humanitarian or democratic reason, they repeated the mistake that was done by George Bush with the fall of Saddam Hussein. They put down the bulwark without a B plan. They didn't have a strategy. The strategy of the post-Saddam in Iraq was the worst possible one. That is, all the people from all the Sunni people from the Ba'ath Party were eliminated, and now they are the commander of ISIS. Very simple. The clash between the Shiites and the Sunni, with a pro-Shiite government, and in fact a very strong pressure from Iran, exploded in constant struggles inside the countries. And more or less, we did exactly the same thing in Libya, for instance. What happened? At a certain point of time, many people still wonders why they needed that so much. Especially the French and then the British, they just found out that Gaddafi was no more presentable, pas sortable, as the French say. And they pushed the situation with a lukewarm support from President Obama and a bit stronger support from Hillary Clinton. So they pushed the situation for an armed intervention, which they did. What a pity that Gaddafi was the only unifying element in Libya. So what happened? Remember that Libya were 3 provinces under the Ottoman Empire. Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and Fezzan, plus a number of tribes operating on the territory. The situation came back to what happened before. This is the strange nemesis of history. The moment you touch something, histories come back. Who was that said that first time was like a tragedy, the second time was like a farce? I don't remember who said that. So we are now, and this is a good asset, you would say. Now it's much worse because, in fact, just consider what is this tribal situation in Libya. It's a mess. you have 14 major tribal entities, plus some ethnics like the Tuareg or the Tubu in the south. No central authority, no plan, no project, no reconstruction perspective. Italy is especially suffering about that because of the immigrating influxes. What do we do now? Do we come back to that? What will be the issue of the Libyan problem? I don't know, frankly, nobody knows. Shall we come back to that? Shall we come back to that? There is two provinces, for instance, Cyrenaica and Tripolitania, considering that the most important oil well are in Cyrenaica, on that side, although our presence is quite strong, as you see, in the western side. This is what's happening more or less now. This is not completely updated. This is the situation on the field in Libya. You know that we have two major sides confronting each other. On one side, the yellow one, here, is what is called Operation Karama, Dignity, which is led by this General Haftar, who has now been appointed commander-in-chief for the armed forces in Libya, and which is struggling and fighting hardly against the other operation, the Operation Fahir, on the west. So, again, we have the two parts facing each other. I'm cutting off very, very fast. So I'll tell you all of this. And this is the red part, so the western part, the Fahir operation is led by the Misrata militias, which has 40,000 people. It's not very small. On the other side, we have the Karama operation with all the people from the east, from Benghazi, and Haftar trying to bomb the government, the western side. In Libya, there are now two governments, two parliaments. Nobody knows exactly who is ruling who. Zintan is another tribe which is supporting, let's say, Alliance de Revers, as the French would say, against Misrata. But nothing happens, in fact. The situation is staling. Nothing like this. So I sum up because otherwise Marco will shoot me. The point is, at this very moment, neither Europe nor the United States, as far as we are able to understand, has a strategy for North Africa and the Middle East. Nobody knows what to do. I have some personal idea of what is going on now on the far Middle East, that is between with the Yemen situation, but we can discuss it later if you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for not being here today. I missed the session, which, according to the program, was a very interesting session. And I will try to keep my presentation as short as possible, because sometimes a connection via internet is not so good, a bit heavy to follow. Please, if you have any problem in hearing me, let me know, inform me so that I adapt my voice to your needs. Thank you very much to Professor Farjon for having invited me to this conference. I have appreciated very much the title of the conference, EU and Member States in Global Affairs, Any Sign of Convergence. I think that this is really a crucial topic in the EU as an international actor debate. And what has been highlighted by the scholars nowadays is that there is no alternative to the understanding and appreciation of the EU international role if we consider each political issue separately. And what is also acknowledged widely is that the EU has a lack of consistency. And lack of coherence and consistency is also clear when we deal with the Mediterranean area. As a matter of fact, when the European Union is faced with great challenges, with big challenges, the EU is rather quick to react and to adopt a policy, but then some problems arise when the policy has to be implemented. Just bring two clear examples. When the Arab Spring, the so-called Arab Spring, has started in early 2011, the European Union has promptly adopted the Partnership for Democracy area. But then some problems arise when implementing consistently and effectively the Partnership for Democracy. Or else, we had on the 18th of April a dramatic, terrible accident in the Mediterranean with the death of almost 1,000 people, migrants, and the European Council has organized a special meeting adopting a few points, sort of roadmap to follow in order to deal more effectively with the migration. But then what happens? It happens that there is already a clear misunderstanding on the definition of concepts such as strengthening the EU presence at sea or fighting traffickers, which includes also the destroyal of vessels in third countries, in Mediterranean countries. And also the way how the resettlement has to be tackled is not that clear. This means then that EU member states continue to be sometimes not on the same tone, not on the same having and sharing the same approach to tackle security issues in the area, security problems in the Mediterranean. This is a problem, a typical problem of EU foreign policy. If we consider, for example, that the insistence on democracy in EU foreign policy has been constant, a characteristic of EU foreign policy. But then, in practice, for decades, the European Union has preferred stability rather than fostering democracy. And some authoritarian leaders, such as Ben Ali or Mubarak, have been good friends of the European Union in order to strengthen and guarantee stability. What is going on today? We had the Arab Spring, but unfortunately, despite the EU is still insisting on the rhetoric of democracy promotion, thanks to the so-called 3M approach, more money, more market, and more mobility. Actually, many problems which were on the table before the beginning of the Arab Spring are still there. Just to be very brief, the overview on the Mediterranean neighborhood is not so rosy. At the regional level, we have that no real democratic change has taken place so far. If we intend the southern neighborhood as such, in some countries, of course, I have in mind Tunisia, transition has taken place. The way towards the liberal democracy is clear. Then we have to see whether consolidation will take place. But for the rest, many authoritarian regimes still in place. Politically, what should we say on the political dimension? The European Union several years ago was very unhappy when Hamas was elected, I would say democratically, and it refused to have contacts with the political Islam. This is clear, not a policy the EU can still adopt. And politically, it has been clear that political Islam has become an interlocutor of, in the area of the European Union. Economically, at the economic level, no new dynamics seem to be emerging. Most of the factors that were the origin of the protests and unrest continue to persist, and socioeconomic inequalities and high young unemployment are still unsolved problems and issues. I would like to mention also an important problem which is there, the problem of the statehood. Because statehood is hijacking the process of political change. If we consider, for example, the case of Libya, the fact that we do not have one single counterpartner, but more than one partner, really complicates the picture of cooperation in the area. Other political problems are still there. Corruption still characterizes the highly dysfunctional and inefficient bureaucracy, or more in general, we can say that the Mediterranean area is still a troubled area, where in some cases democratic change is taking place, like in Tunisia, but in other cases we have an authoritarian resiliency, or maybe the resurgence of the authoritarian turn in Egypt. We still have the civil war in Syria, a chaotic situation in Libya, no political change at all in Algeria, Jordan, or Morocco. This is the picture, the complicated picture, and the European Union is trying to provide some support to promote democracy. What is in the Partnership for Democracy and Shared Prosperity adopted in 2011? What is good and what is not good in this strategy? Well, on the one hand, the fact that the European Union has claimed that in order to achieve deep democracy, it is important to invest on institution building is for sure something we should appreciate. Because what is important is that the democratization process is, first of all, a locally driven process. The EU, according to cooperation frameworks, can, in a way, provide some support, but first of all, it's local actors who have to take the lead and be deeply involved in democracy promotion. The European Union, I would say, has been consistent in proposing a comprehensive approach to promote reforms. And what I mean by comprehensive approach is to invest on more dimensions. I mentioned the institution building dimension, but we should also mention the fact that the European Union has promised more money, it has promised more mobility, and it has promised more market exchange, the so-called 3 M's strategy. Is this a rosy picture? Not at all. In fact, if I can quote, for example, a recent article by Federica Bicchi, it seems that if we take into account aid to this area, the EU policy aid to this area, probably the EU is offering, instead of more for more, less for the same. Because in the rhetoric of democracy promotion, there is always this reference to more money, to the need to invest more, and also Gulf countries have promised to invest more in this area. But then, if we look at the figures, it seems that less of the same is provided. Also, if we have a look at the rhetoric of the international donors, it seems that stabilization, job creation, participation in government, political and economic integration are entering into the policy approach, the new policy approaches of international donors, but then it is important to see what is implemented in reality. I would highlight a few problems, a few critical issues I see in the area. I think that the European Union has some domestic problems in clearly identifying priorities. I still have the feeling that there is a sort of imbalance between southern neighbors and eastern neighbors, and EU member states have different interests in fostering cooperation with one area rather than the other area. And I also see some institutional constraints which reduce the effectiveness and the consistency of the EU in the area, because despite the Lisbon Treaty has identified some new institutions, it has created the European External Action Service and strengthened the role of the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Policy. It seems that these institutions are suffering from a sort of institutional fatigue. We have today 28 member states who provide bureaucrats to the European External Action Service, and still these bureaucrats have to be socialized to the EU bureaucracy machinery. And also the interests of different member states, different interests of member states do have an impact on a consistent international role in the area. Two more comments, two more critical aspects I would like to highlight. One principle which is always mentioned is the co-ownership principle, which is identified as a positive strategy in order to relaunch EU involvement in the area. I think that co-ownership needs political commitment.
I just tell you that you have 5 minutes left. Just to...
1 minute. Both on the EU and the Med neighbors side. And I also think that when we deal with security cooperation, we probably should adopt and find new ideas. One new idea on migration, which is nowadays becoming more and more popular, is probably to provide free movement to all regular migrants in order to achieve a positive result, ideally, in the long run or in the medium run, against the criminal groups who are profiting of poverty in the Mediterranean shores and sub-Saharan Africa. These are the critical issues I would like to provide and share with you in order to animate the debate, and that's all on my side for the time being. Thanks for listening.
So thank you, Stefania, for your presentation. They're full of question marks. We are perfectly in time, so I'm so glad to give to have my friend Luciano Bozzo that will be the discussant of these first two presentations. You don't need I don't need to introduce Luciano Bozzo to you, because obviously he's so well known and he's a sort of a pillar of the international relation of the Department of Political Science in Florence. I think it's very useful that we have this MA, graduate course with European Studies and International Relations, which are very strongly connected. So I give you, I hope you will give the comments. You know how much you can speak about 25 minutes or whatever you want, and then we have a coffee break, and we continue with other very interesting issues like Turkey and other northern parts of Europe. I mean, all areas of conflict. Okay, Luciano, please.
Thank you, Marco, for your, I would say, moving introduction. It is always difficult, embarrassing to be a discussant. First of all, because people, they are waiting for some wise, deep comment about what has been said by others. You have short time also to reflect on what it has been said. And it's even more embarrassing to be defined a pillar, because, you know, in strategic terms, a strategy has been mentioned before by Ambassador. In strategic term, pillar is rigid, you know, and rigidity, it's the most dangerous thing, quality in a strategic approach. Pillars, they break easily when they are under stress, and I would try not to break being now under stress. But in any case, I will try to summarize as I can what has been said. I think that here the basic problem is the problem on which Ambassador Merola has focused, that is the building and rebuilding of international order. I see that Ambassador Merola has brought with him the last book written by Henry Kissinger, World Order. You know, here it's a matter of world order, regional order, but Ambassador Merola has been talking about two different regions, Middle Eastern region and then North Africa, so the wider so-called MENA region. But of course, the problem of order in those two regions, especially on these days for obvious reasons, is related to the more general problem of the entire international system. Now, Ambassador Merola has mentioned the collapse, first of all, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War, and immediately after the end of the Second World War, the collapse of the British Empire. Yes, those two empires were providers of services, so provider of security, stability, a reasonable amount of wealth, and so on. Obviously, I mean, Ambassador Merola declared his enthusiasm for the old empires. This is a very elegant way to present the point. I would like to remind that, of course, there was a cost for those services, and the cost was autonomy, was sovereignty, was freedom. Empires, they disappeared from the scene of world politics, and there must be some good reasons. I'm not so much regretting in thinking of the collapse of the empires, but of course, this doesn't solve the problem of world order. We need an order, and we need, this is the crucial point, a stable order. I mean, it is easy to design a future order, to try to implement an order, as they did those two diplomats that you have mentioned. But of course, the crucial point is how to provide sufficient stability to the new order, either at the local, regional, or the global level. So we have to ask ourselves, I think, what are the sources of order? And in my opinion, the problem is, in relative terms, simple. Sources of order are power, force, military force, economic power, cultural, of course, power, ideology, in a sense. And then, of course, there is legitimacy. So, power and law, to put it in a simple way. In order to provide a stable order to any international system, you need either an hegemonic power, strong enough and willing to provide this kind of service of public good in a sense, or in different terms, to a world community or to a regional community, or you need a balance of power. I mean, a group of powers that they are able to balance each other. In both cases, of course, there is a nice addendum to this point, that you have to be ready to use force, either to govern the system with military might, or to balance those hegemonic attempts that they would endanger the stability of a system if you are in a system of balance of power. Of course, then there is the other end of the continuum, law, institutions. The problem with the institution is that sometimes there is so much of law, enough of law, of rules, of norms, of principles, but nobody is ready to implement and to enforce those institutions. So institutions, they work well when there is agreement among the members of any institution. The point is that, especially in times of crisis, especially after the collapse of an empire, the needs and the interest of all the political units that they come out from the collapse of the previous existing and bigger political unit are not homogeneous, are in contrast to each other, are conflicting each other. And so it's very difficult to have a stable institution. I mean, the story of the League of Nations after the end of the First World War is the best example that I have in mind. My point is, do we have any of these sources of power on these days in those regions and more general at the international, at the global level? And my answer is no. I mean, there is, according to my modest opinion, no agreement on the rules of the game, especially at the regional level, more and more even at the global level. There is no hegemonic power able to perform the function of a true hegemon at the global level, and there are not even hegemonic power at the local level, and there is no balance of power. I mean, in the Middle East, there is no balance of power because, of course, there are powerful political units, states, but those states are not able to agree on the rules of the game and to balancing each other. They are not even ready to recognize the role of the other. I mean, Israel, good case in point, is a crucial actor for the Middle East, is not even recognized by other powers or non-powers or smaller power in the area. So, having this general framework is quite difficult, in my opinion, to try to envisage a possibility for stability, for a stable order in the Middle East, even worse maybe in Libya or in part of North African region. But Ambassador Merola said also, stressed also another crucial point. I quote, more or less, neither Europe nor the US, Ambassador, you said, as a strategy for the Middle East or North Africa. Fine. I definitely agree on the point.
You may intervene later. I will add some personal thoughts.
Okay. Okay. But in any case, you confirm this...
now.
Yes. Okay. I agree. If that was your idea, I agree with your thoughts. I mean, in my opinion, neither Europe nor the US has a strategy for the entire MENA region. As an add, because you mentioned, for instance, the case of the Iraq War 2003, obviously, at least there was not a wise strategy or a long period strategy, effective strategy for the area or for that country. My point is why there is no such a strategy. What do you need in order to have a strategy, to build a strategy? Well, basically, the theory of strategy tells you that in order to have an effective, credible strategy, you need means, ways, and political aims, objectives, clear, defined objectives. But first of all, you need something else. You need an agent, a player, a strategic actor, if you like. I mean, a subject, a political unit who has the means and the will to perform this role of strategic player. Now, I wonder if in the current international situation, you have this kind of strategic player. A player who's ready not only to push its aims, its objectives, but also to try at least to provide public goods such as, I mentioned for the second time, security, stability, reasonable amount of wealth for the community, for the group of states interested in that order. The US or other Western powers, do they have means? Obviously they have means. I mean, military might, it's not even in discussion. Economic strength, obviously. This is the richest country in the world. Do they have ways, reasonable ways, doctrines to try to connect those different means? I would add also political influence, culture. To connect, to relate those different means in nature, different in nature, to political objectives. I believe so. I mean, I have read and I also witnessed interesting attempts to try to translate, for instance, high technology military means into instrument for politics. Rumsfeld doctrine. One can criticize that doctrine. I think that it had many weak points. But on the other hand, it was a reasonably sophisticated doctrine for the use of military might in order to push a certain kind of political aim. The problem is not in ways and means, the problem is in politics. Behind those means and ways, is there a coherent, long period design, vision for the world in the coming 20, 30, 40 years? I doubt, especially if I look at the current US administration. I mean, Obama is a nice guy, he's elegant, he's a good speaker, he has a lot of virtues. But he lacks the typical attribute, it's my personal opinion, of a world political leader. And maybe it's not its fault. He lacks the ability to take decisions and to implement those decisions when you have taken them. I think that in this sense, the policy of the administration the foreign policy of the US administration in the Middle East was a disaster over the last years. I mean, I see the reasons for that. I'm not saying that Obama is not able to see the point. The problem is that it doesn't want to do or to do too much, because this is politically costly in the internal arena. He has other priorities, you know. Foreign policy is dangerous, is dirty. I mean, foreign policy means to kill people and to spend money. This is foreign policy, you know, to be brutal. The rest is wishy-washy, you know. Foreign policy means to kill people and to spend money. In order to kill people and to spend money, a lot of money, and to kill a lot of people, in order to justify a foreign policy, you need good political reasons. That is the justification for that. You need a strategy, having first to design, to plan that strategy, a clear-cut political end. This is the only ethical justification, let me add, for foreign policy. You know, this is the true ethical justification. You can kill people and you can spend public money only if you have a reasonably good political aim. I mean, an aim which is good for the police. The problem is that today you don't want to spend money and you don't want to kill, first of all, your people, because we have to, you know, to do war zero cost in terms of casualties, and so we use these funny, you know, planes without pilot, the drones. We use robots. We use all these nice technologies. So zero cost of the war. The problem is that then the war is not effective or enough effective on the field. And so we are not able to solve the problems. I mean, problems in history, international problems, they have been solved in different ways, you know, not only through war. You have force and you have law. You have violence and you have institutions. But you have also to take into account the possibility to mix these different kind of means and to be ready to use them. Niccolò Machiavelli, a Florentine, wrote his two most important works, Il Principe, obviously, and I discorsi sulla prima decada di Tito Livio. In the first, he was taking into account the need for force. In the second, the importance of law and legitimacy, and then institution. Simply because he was aware of this basic, simple, stupid fact that policy and foreign policy is made of those two components. If you deprive a foreign policy of those components, how can you build stability? Implementation. Do we know what we really want to have at the end of the process of implementation? What are the aims of our foreign policy? Stability versus democracy. Frankly, I'm not able to see foreign policy according to this kind of dialectic. Yes, we failed in promoting democracy in the Arab world. I have been listening thousands of people in these last 2-3 years repeating, lecturing to me, oh, we didn't do enough for democratization. Let me ask a question which was crucial already in the age of mutual deterrence. In the old good times of Cold War, how much is enough? How much is enough? How much we have to spend in terms of money, in terms of human resources, in terms of common initiative, in terms of whatever you like, in order to try to transform the Arab world in the Western world? It's ridiculous. I mean, are there the conditions to build democracy? The day when I heard at the radio that our good fellows, the French, had started to bomb Libya, I immediately wrote an email message to a good friend and colleague of mine, professor of international relations, elsewhere. And I wrote in Italian 3 words, in English maybe 4. Are we completely full? Because in my mind, the story was clear. Now we will make a regime change. We will kill the other good fellow, Gaddafi. And then what? Do you truly believe that it's possible to democratize Libya? But have you read a couple of books on the past of Libya, on Libyan society, on the Vilayet during the Ottoman Empire, on the tribal organization quote unquote, of that country, on the geography of that country, on Italian domination of that country? I mean, this is pure garbage. We wanted to democratize Iraq. You know, democratize Iraq. It's an easy issue, you know. I mean, we went to Afghanistan. Now I'm quoting an American general. One day we were talking during a conference, and he told me, well, you know what is the problem? That we went to Afghanistan with this idea that we wanted to build there a sort of, I quote, Jeffersonian democracy. And he was laughing, you know, saying, but this is pure nonsense, you know. Have you ever been to Afghanistan? Do you know that society? Do you know that? What's this? I mean, democracy is a product of the West. Like free market, like a certain idea of society, a certain idea of men, of the individual rights, like the existing international law, like the European institution, all these beautiful things that we have been building over a few centuries of history. In Europe, in Western Europe, within a certain cultural framework, having certain roots. And now we want to transplant this beautiful little plant of flowers, you know, and we give this beautiful little plant of flowers to those people that are waiting to have the bunch of flowers, you know. Oh, have a little bit of democracy, have a little bit of human rights, have a little bit of Hollywood movies or neo-realist movies, you know, or whatever you prefer, French cinema. It doesn't work that way. The EU has got problems in identifying priorities. Well, obviously, because the EU is not a strategic actor, is not a political actor in the traditional, of course, sense definition of the term. Why we are not able to define priorities? I would like to ask to these students here, how many of you have heard that a few days ago, a military ship in Finland from the Finnish Navy has released 6 anti-submarine bombs, in order to try to identify a submarine which was, going around in front of Helsinki. How many of you have heard that a couple of days later, national media in Finland have broadcasted an interesting news? They are informing the reservists of the places in the country where they have to go in case of an intense crisis. Nobody here has heard. Nobody cares. You couldn't care less of the Finnish Navy or the Estonian problems, or, let's be frank, the Ukrainian crisis. But of course, we are very much focused on Libya, because, there are those few thousand people arriving every week, because we have, of course, the oil. Ambassador Merola has shown a quite interesting, map. In that map, there were tribes, there were borders, and then there were nice icons, the dog with 6 legs, total. I mean, there we have major major economic, social, and political interest. And we have to take care of the issue, because otherwise next winter you will take a cold shower and you will have a nice of these good fellows around your house asking, may I sleep on your floor, because I didn't find a place where to sleep. That's the base for foreign policy. One of the major disasters of this last quarter of a century was to think that you can orient your foreign policy according to abstract general principles, if ever. Democracy. We have to define our foreign policy in order to try to develop democracy in Libya, or we have to try more pragmatically, let me say, to think of the fact that for us Libya is a major problem, that from Libya they are coming real threats in the sense, major economic, potentially social, and then political troubles for this country. This is the problem. I have been speaking now too much, I think. Sorry to be provocative, but more or less they know me, so they know this is my usual style, so nothing new to their delicate, pure ears. Thank you very much for your patience.
Now is obviously your turn, because we will have some questions and answers. So I really, who is going to break the ice?
Ok, volevo chiedere al professor Bozzo, lei dice ovviamente che si tratta di un problema di esportazione illogica, l'idea di esportare una democrazia e l'idea di, come dire, esportare qualcosa che è frutto ovviamente di un percorso storico che appunto non è proprio a livello di radici. Però allo stesso tempo non si può neanche in qualche modo dire semplicemente questa è effettivamente una minaccia e fine, punto. Lei stesso ha detto adesso le guerre non sono più in termini di inviare carne umana al macello, ma sono guerre coi droni. I droni, i computer e tutto quanto vengono alimentati col coltan, che è comunque una riserva che per ora viene gestita in maniera assolutamente illegale nella Repubblica Democratica del Congo, che comunque è inevitabilmente un qualcosa verso il quale ci si deve proiettare. Ci sono multinazionali di mezzo, non si può semplicemente dire non è esportabile una nostra regola nel momento in cui teoricamente la nostra supremazia, che teoricamente anche quella europea, di costruire un'economia fondata sulla conoscenza e sull'avanzamento tecnologico si basa su delle materie prime che sono in luoghi che in qualche modo noi stiamo depredando in assenza di leggi. Non possiamo semplicemente dire non c'è una regola applicabile a loro e dunque affrontiamolo con una logica di scontro, non possiamo lavarci le mani. Grazie.
Rispondi subito o facciamo un tentativo di qualcun altro? Sì, non so però come collegarmi con la Stefania. Stefania? Non abbiamo il tecnico. Proviamo a guardare, grazie. Sì, c'è Stefania? Sì, perché bisogna dargli...
Ce l'ho con lei.
Stefania? Sì. Non sente la Stefania?
Forse è meglio.
Devo tentare fra un po'. Non sente me, perché bisogna fare un'operazione che non... Ok, ci sono altri, se no facciamo intanto, poi facciamo il break e eventualmente le domande dopo. Nessun altro?
Debbo, I knew you should be silent and quiet when you are a discussant, if possible, as much as you can, because then you find yourself in troubles. Look, where is the lady? Okay, you are there. You know, in a sense, in what you ask, there is a nice paradox. I love paradoxes. Because for centuries, at least for 4 centuries, we, the Europeans, we were extremely successful in export. We have been exporting not only goods, but laws, habits, religions, culture in general terms. We were extremely successful. We have created the current international system. We made globalization. There is only a little minor point. We did so because we were dominating most of the rest of the world. And our hands, they were a little bit dirty of blood. That was the point. Now, of course, we wanted to export these new products, for instance, democracy, without, of course, becoming dirty, or sometimes even becoming dirty, but then, you know, stopping the process. Okay, we made the regime change. Now it's your turn. You have to build your own democracy. We gave you peace. Peace in the sense of the end of war. Peace is not the end of a war. It's something else. At the end of the war, then you have to build a reasonably stable internal, regional, or even global order. We are not able, we are not willing, we don't want, for several reasons, to do what we have done for centuries. Even because, in the meanwhile, the international system has changed, you know. We are no more the center of the system. And there are new powers belonging to different cultures, China, India, becoming more and more important and powerful in economic, military, cultural terms, and they want to play a bigger role in the system. And they play a bigger role in the system. It's already evident. I mean, not so many people know that when the crisis in Libya started, the People's Republic of China was able to bring back some 4,000 Chinese, workers, employees, and so on, experts, quote unquote, of different kinds, that they were in Libya. And that was an extremely efficient operation, and it's quite striking to think that in Libya there were 4,000, even more, Chinese. Doing what? I mean, the Chinese presence in the Mediterranean is not maybe so evident, but when you go to Athens, you should be conscious that the harbor there in front of the airport practically is organized by a Chinese company. And this meant, by the way, the solution of a few little problems that there were in that harbor, organization of work and so on. So I see your point. We want to be good, we want to be honest, and we want to spread our values in the rest of the system. And we think that is a good thing to do. It's precisely what we were thinking in previous ages. The difference is that we have changed the values and we have changed the means. My point is it reasonable with the new means to try to perform those objectives? And my personal answer is no. I think that in foreign policy there was, and there will be for the coming future, a link between power and your ability to spread resources, values, culture, whatever. Not by chance, your generation is so well-informed and so penetrated by the American culture. American music, American movies, American fashion. How come? By chance? as a sudden we discovered that the Americans, they were so well dressed and they produced so beautiful movies? No. It's a matter of power distribution in the international system after the end of the Second World War, when America became, slowly, the dominant power in the system and performed for a long while that function. That's it.
Before the coffee break, first of all, I tell you that Ambassador Merola has written an interesting article, Tripoli or Land of Love, that we can obviously... It's okay. And then I think he will give a short comment and then we can stop for the coffee break.
No, brevissimo, perché anch'io ho volevo soltanto dire questo, aggiungerei a tutto quello che ha detto il professor Bozzo. C'è un elemento che mi sa che sta diventando abbastanza periclitante, sfarinato negli ultimi tempi, ed è la leadership. C'è un discorso sulla democrazia, ne avevamo già parlato anche così anche col professor Maier. Il punto di fondo è questo: noi continuiamo a dire esportiamo la nostra democrazia. Quindi non una democrazia, la nostra democrazia. La nostra democrazia, o meglio se volete il nostro sistema democratico, fondamentalmente è basato ancora sulla rivoluzione francese, no? Ripartizione dei poteri, insomma, arricchito poi dalle differenti versioni e altro, ma sostanzialmente questo è. Ora, il grande problema secondo me, ma questo ve lo do solo come spunto di riflessione, è che questa democrazia sta cominciando un po' a perdere i colpi. Noi vediamo benissimo che sia per motivi elettorali, sia per motivi di gestione della democrazia, anche se siamo anni luce lontano da altri paesi evidentemente, però questo sistema sembra che non sta diventando più tanto funzionale. Qui ci stiamo ammazzando sulle leggi elettorali, adesso parliamo un occhio all'Italia tanto per avvicinarci, ci stiamo ammazzando sulle leggi elettorali, sulle riforme costituzionali, non abbiamo più una governance che somiglia a qualche cosa, il sistema maggioranza opposizione si è sfarinato, non c'è più opposizione, è sparita in 3 giorni. C'è qualcosa che non va, evidentemente. E la stessa cosa sta succedendo negli Stati Uniti. Ma dico, signori, avete letto, state leggendo che cosa sta succedendo col problema della polizia negli Stati Uniti, che ogni giorno c'è un Collard morto e rivolte da tutte le parti? Ma vi sembra normale? Dico, questa qui è il frutto del sistema di governance? Beh, allora si vede che c'è qualcosa che non va. L'altro problema è il discorso di leadership, come dicevo, cioè il povero Obama, poveraccio, anche se anch'io l'ho amato molto, insomma adesso lo amo un pochino meno, ma insomma, è chiaro che adesso è un po' fuori controllo, insomma, no? Ormai la campagna elettorale è cominciata alla grande, le decisioni che ha preso, vedremo, fa l'accordo con l'Iran, con il Parlamento che gli dice sì, però poi noi ci ripensiamo, è inutile che lo fai perché tanto stai a perdere tempo. O si presenta, cosa orrenda in campo internazionale, si presenta Netanyahu a parlare al congresso in aperto dissidio, anzi addirittura in maniera aggressiva nei confronti del presidente. Ma sono follie queste qua, c'è un'America che si sopporta queste cose, evidentemente vive una situazione di disagio fortissima. L'unica cosa che mi chiedo, e questo volevo aggiungere soltanto, dico, tutti stiamo dicendo, perché effettivamente questa è l'impressione che tutti abbiamo, che non c'è una strategia per questo Medio Oriente, questo broader Middle East, insomma, in qualche modo. Io comincio a pensare che forse un minimo di strategia c'è, e non è una strategia di stabilità, è una strategia di instabilità. L'accordo che è stato fatto con l'Iran, che sta in via di fattura, diciamo così, sul nucleare, ma che ovviamente non riguarda solo il nucleare, riguarda il ruolo dell'Iran nella regione, che è cresciuto molto negli ultimi 2 o 3 anni, un po' grazie alla Siria, un po' grazie all'Iraq, un po' grazie a tutta una serie di altre cose. L'Iran, ovvero chiamata la Persia, era un grande impero, attenzione, dico, non è che si sveglia adesso, insomma. Ed è stato confinato sia per motivi religiosi, dato il discorso dello sciismo, eccetera, sia perché c'era stata questa rivoluzione interna, clerical, massimalista, non so come la vogliamo chiamare, cose del genere. Vabbè, adesso sta ritornando piano piano a quello che è il posto suo, quel posto che gli spetta. Con una piccola variante, io mi chiedo se, anche se voi leggete l'ultima strategia militare uscita l'anno scorso degli Stati Uniti, è tutto un redeployment, cioè non ci abbiamo i soldi. Allora, quello che ci abbiamo lo dobbiamo concentrare. Dove lo concentriamo? In Asia. Tiriamo via dall'Europa, tiriamo via dal Medio Oriente, tiriamo via da tutte le altre parti del mondo e concentriamo in Asia. Ora è chiaro che se una superpotenza come gli Stati Uniti è cioè in via di riorganizzare completamente tutto quello che è il deployment, cioè lo spiegamento militare e non solo, verso un diverso focus, che chiaramente non è quello europeo e non sarà nemmeno quello orientale, peggio ancora quello africano, e dico, deve avere le spalle coperte in qualche modo. Come? Prima ce l'aveva con i famosi gendarmi a cui facevo allusione io, adesso questi gendarmi non ci stanno più, la situazione è talmente confusa e complicata lì in tutta l'area che comincio a chiedermi se gli Stati Uniti in fondo non considerino questa situazione di ribollire dell'acqua, non la considerano funzionale. In fondo, se io non ho un potere egemone, e in questo gioca il discorso dell'Iran, nella regione, cioè si continuano a scannare, cosa che facevano all'epoca Iran e Iraq, adesso saranno probabilmente Iran e Arabia Saudita, con tutto il corteo di Emirati e compagnia bella. Ho le mani libere per occuparmi di altri settori, che in questo caso sarà probabilmente l'Asia. Quello che rimane abbastanza poco spiegabile, ma questo non lo so, chiedo anche così ai colleghi la loro opinione, me ne parleremo al caffè, è che c'entra l'Ucraina. Cioè, questo è un discorso che io ancora, francamente, non ho capito. Che posto ha l'Ucraina in questo contesto? Non lo so. Vi lascio il dubbio. Andiamo a prendere il caffè. Grazie.
Stefania, sei in linea?
Io dico,
hai qualche commento?
ma io apprezzo tutti i commenti del professore Bozzo. È chiaro che le nostre impostazioni metodologiche e teoriche sono diverse, ma in realtà non tanto rispetto alla valutazione concreta dei problemi nell'area. L'unica cosa che mi sento di dover dire è che attraverso quella rilettura non si comprendono le ragioni della primavera araba, dove per me per primavera significa protesta. Protesta significa centinaia di cittadini tunisini, egiziani e quant'altro che hanno manifestato, protestato e talvolta perso anche la vita per dei valori che non sono soltanto occidentali, i valori della libertà, della difesa dei diritti umani, della capacità democratica di contrastare il presidente Ben Ali di turno. Secondo me non sono valori che possono essere etichettati né come occidentali né come non arabi, e questo forse è quello che dovremmo trarre come lezione delle proteste del 2011, per cui io forse toglierei l'etichetta di democrazia all'occidentale e cercherei di osservare cosa per i tunisini oggi vuol dire regime democratico, ed è un caso interessante di regime non più autoritario, per carità in via di formazione ancora debole, deve essere consolidato, che però ha perso le forme dell'autoritarismo arabo. Cioè ci sono i sindacati, ci sono gli imprenditori, c'è tanta gente in Tunisia che ha voglia di instaurare un regime ben diverso da quello del passato e ben diverso anche dai regimi democratici occidentali, che tanti problemi hanno, per carità. Mi sentivo solo di sottolineare questo, posto che io non ho mai detto che l'Unione Europea vuole esportare democrazia, perché è una parola assolutamente orrenda, e condivido con la vostra analisi e con questa critica. Grazie, buon lavoro.
Bene, grazie. Il caffè insieme non lo possiamo prendere, se vuoi stare dopo con noi ora facciamo un'interruzione di coffee break. Ciao Stefania.
Una pausa.